Hey guys, apologies for my voice. I'm sick. I read a lot of things in June that I can't discuss, but here are four books that I can recommend. First of those is the recent debut memoir, And Now We Have Everything on Motherhood Before I Was Ready by Meaghan O'Connell. I always forget the first part of the title. I don't know why the subtitle isn't just the main title. But anyway, I received an electronic copy of this from Little Brown, and I'm going to write about it for Open Letters. So for now, I'll just say that, as you could guess from the title, this is O'Connell's account of getting pregnant well before she and her fiance had planned for it, and it follows her up through childbirth and early motherhood. The childbirth chapter is reminiscent of Caitlin Moran's in How to Be a Woman, if any of you have read that. Just harrowing, and I admired the way O'Connell writes about the fear of early parenthood. This is being billed as a really funny memoir, and O'Connell is funny, but a lot of the humor relies on self-deprecation, and I found myself getting kind of exasperated with how pathologically self-deprecating the author is, which is weird for me to say because a lot of my humor falls in that vein as well, so I'm not exactly sure why I didn't gel with it completely. I think part of it too is that the author got pregnant when she was 29, but this same memoir could easily have been written by a 19-year-old. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm being fair in my assessment of it. So I'm gonna write about it for Open Letters and see if I can articulate things better there. But for now, I'll just say that in general, I do recommend this, especially if you're interested in a really honest look at being unprepared to be a parent. Next up is The Warden by Anthony Trollope. I've been meaning to read Trollope for ages, so I'm so excited to have finally started The Chronicles of Barsetshire. It's a series of 6 books. Sorry, I just knocked the table here. And this is the first in that series. It was published in 1855 and is about clerical upheaval in a small English town. So essentially, several centuries before, a man named John Hiram set aside a portion of his will to go to a retirement home for local men of humble backgrounds and for a warden to act as their spiritual leader. Over the years, the living has substantially increased, but that surplus has traditionally gone into the pockets of whoever was the warden at the time, as opposed to going to the dozen or so old men living on the property. The current warden is a genial middle-aged clergyman named Mr. Harding, whose calm life is upended when his friend, a young whippersnapper named John Bold, begins investigating Hiram's original will and questioning whether or not Harding's salary should actually be split amongst the old men in his care. And Bold drums up national support for his side by going to the papers, which begin writing about sweet, simple Mr. Harding as though he's vice incarnate. The novel is essentially a series of character studies, examining each person's innermost motives. No one is entirely flawed or entirely virtuous. Some fall more on one end than the other, but Trollope is so good at showing multiple sides of one character trait. So take John Bold's idealism. He really believes that it's important to fight for justice and to keep the powerful from taking advantage of the vulnerable. Having said that, he's more than a little self-righteous, and he goes about pursuing justice on a grand scale without considering how it operates on a more intimate level. This is a very quiet novel, and it's the type of Victorian novel that has many asides to an omniscient narrator. There's an entire chapter that's a scathing indictment of newspapers, which was interesting to read in this political climate that's very rah-rah journalism, at least in my corner of the internet. I knew going in not to expect fireworks from this book, and it's not all that memorable, but it has such a lovely spirit to it, and I'm really excited to read more Trollope. Next up is a fantastic short story collection, Almost Famous Women by Mayhew Bergman, and she says in an author's note at the end, "The stories in this collection are born of fascination with real women whose remarkable lives were reduced to footnotes." So there are 13 stories that sprang from research and then metamorphosed into fictional reimaginings. One is about Dolly Wilde, Oscar Wilde's niece. Another is about Lucia Joyce, who's James Joyce's daughter, who was committed to an asylum. One of the shorter pieces is on Beryl Markham, who was an aviator, horsewoman, and writer. And that story starts with this tantalizing quote from Hemingway. "But this girl, who is to my knowledge very unpleasant, and we might even say a high-grade bitch, can write rings around all of us. I had two favorite stories. The first is about Allegra Byron, who was Lord Byron's illegitimate daughter, and it's following her from the time she's sent to a convent as a toddler. It's such a sad story and tender. Bergman's touch is beautiful. And the second mentions a woman named Butterfly McQueen, who played one of the maids in Gone with the Wind. And this story focuses on a brief interaction she has with a young Christian girl who's trying to convert McQueen from her atheism. Those two were standouts for me, but the whole collection is confident, carefully paced, and emotionally has this quality of being so tough and so sensitive at the same time. Bergman rarely writes from the perspectives of these women. She usually invents someone who's removed from them and who acts as both a personal and a semi-historical gaze. So it's like we're not being granted permission to crawl inside these women's heads. And we don't meet them in their primes. Most of the stories center on the ends of their lives when they're shadows of who they were or who they expected to become. So it's not exactly a peppy reading experience. And I enjoyed the later stories more than the earlier ones, but I'm a huge fan. Lastly is the title that's been everywhere this year, the debut memoir Educated by Tara Westover, and I'm riding that hype train. This book is wonderful. It's just a really good story that's told really well. Westover's in her 30s now, I think. So this is her looking back on her fairly recent childhood in rural Idaho with her devout Mormon family. And her father has a lot of out there beliefs that have nothing to do with Mormonism. He's paranoid that the government's gonna come get them all. He stocks food and fuel in a bunker in the backyard to protect the family for the impending end of days. He doesn't believe in schools or hospitals, thinks they're sacrilegious and tools for government brainwashing. And for the average family, it might not matter if you don't go to the hospital for every scrape or headache. But the Westovers work in a junkyard and on the land, and they don't take safety precautions in any areas of life. And this leads to horrific accidents. As a child, Tara fully subscribes to all of her father's beliefs. And so in a sense, it's a very traditional story of a girl growing up and recognizing the shape of her own mind, which are her parents' beliefs and which are her own. But it's such an extreme case of that. And along the way, Westover's not condemning her family or claiming that everything about her past is horrible. There's a lot of nostalgia in the childhood descriptions, and you get nuanced glimpses of her family members. The arc of the memoir, which you learn from the jacket, is that Tara ends up going to college when she's 17, even though she's never set foot in a classroom before, and she eventually goes on to get a PhD from Cambridge. So you do witness the trajectory of that educational journey. But especially when she gets to Cambridge, there are very few descriptions of her studies or her general experiences there, because the book is primarily focused on her evolving relationship to her roots. So in the later sections, because it's a memoir and theoretically relies on a certain level of accuracy, it gets a little repetitive where it's like, so I studied for a semester and then I went home and here's what happened at home. Then I studied and then I was home. Whereas in a novel, a lot of those events would have been condensed. But Westover has a magnetic narrative voice. There's such a delicate gravity to her writing, and I love her commentary on memory. And the result is a book that's both layered and accessible. It had been a long time since I'd finished a book and immediately started making a mental list of all the people I needed to hand it to. In the intervening month, I've already lent this to my mom and she loved it. So I think it's just the kind of story that you'll want to share with different kinds of readers. Those are my top picks of June. Let me know what you think of them and I'll see you soon. Bye guys. Thanks for watching.